I'm Tori,
And I'm Casey.
and this is your social psychology crash course.
And I'm Dawson.
Social psychology is a scientific study of how we think about, influence, and relate to one another.
The impression formation. This is how we perceive concepts and form our schema. It's mainly influenced by primacy and recency. Primacy is the reason why first impressions are so important, and recency is impression weighted more on later information. Our schema is really influenced by accommodation and assimilation, and to remember the difference, you could always either be vulgar about assimilation or remember stay the same as the S's in assimilation. And accommodation is changing your schema to fit in the new information that you receive.
The attribution process is how we explain behavior, and it's basically described as internal or external, where internal is when behavior is because of just personal reason, like your internal who you are as a person, where external is more based on what's happening around you. And one of the ways we attribute behavior is through the covariation principle, which is where we base our impression on the behavior that occurs when something happens. So this can be done as like distinctiveness, which is how unusual the behavior is to someone. Consistency, which is how often the behavior occurs with the stimulus. And consensus is how it relates to others. And then there's the discounting principle, which is the idea that we should discount the internal when there is a strong external factor. And when we fail to do that, it's called the fundamental attribution error, which is when we do blame the internal more than the external. When you have the fundamental attribution error on someone else but not on yourself, meaning that you would believe that someone else's actions are based on an internal, like they're a bad person, but your actions are because of what's going on around you. That's called the actor-observer bias.
Attitudes and change. An attitude is a positive or negative evaluation versus belief of factual true or false. Compliance is when your attitude is based on the approval of others, and identification is when you take the attitude of someone you admire. Internalization is when your belief on something changes, then your attitude on related topics change as well. Then we have Leon Festinger's theory of cognitive dissonance. His theory of cognitive dissonance is when there's tension because you hold two beliefs that can't both be true, so you have to change one to make things less tense.
Prejudice. A negative belief of a group due to learned behaviors and thoughts from parents and culture. And when you're in competition with someone from one of these other groups, it creates prejudice, and it's also called the realistic conflict theory. Also, another way that prejudice is formed is through in-groups and out-groups. In-group would be the one that you're in, and that it's better than everything else and everyone else. And the out-group would be everyone else who's much worse than you guys are. And next we have the self-fulfilling prophecy, which is when you act a certain way because of a certain belief, furthering the creation of that action being true. And it's shown in the Pygmalion in the classroom, where teachers were told that a certain 20% of the class are late bloomers and that they would learn better later in the school year, so they were treated a different way, furthering that they actually bloom at a later period of time.
The next section is interpersonal attraction, which is basically the way we develop relationships with one another. And this happens through a series of steps that starts with proximity, which is based on your geographical location. It's you must have the ability to meet and get to know someone to develop a relationship with them. And then after there is proximity, then you can move on to liking, which is when you have a high opinion of one another, like you actually like them. And then after that, romantic love can develop, which starts with passion, which is when you're kind of annoying and you're just really have this strong attraction for the other person, like you're just really into them. And then there's intimacy, which is when it's more emotional. You can have self-disclosure, you can talk to the person, you feel like you can tell them anything, and you have trust in them. And then there's commitment, where the passion has subsided, but you still consciously decide you want to maintain this relationship because you do love them. And after all this, there could be marriage, and there are 4 marriage types, which include the total marriage, where you two live one life together, and every decision is made together. It's all as one person. And then there's a vital marriage, where you're kind of less insane and you live your own separate lives, but you're still in love and you're in a happy relationship and marriage. Then there's a devitalized marriage, where you're not really in love anymore, but you're just married for possible socioeconomic reasons. And then there's the conflict habituated marriage, where all of your communication is through conflict and arguing, and you're completely happy with that, but like that's just how you communicate, by yelling at each other, basically. And that is interpersonal attraction.
Conformity is adjusting one's behavior and thinking to coincide with the group's standard. An example of conformity is Solomon Ash's line study, where basically a bunch of college students told to say that one line matched up with an original line when it didn't, to see if the person in the group would conform with the rest of the group. And then we have compliance, which is following rules or orders. An example of compliance is a Milgram study. The Milgram study was when there was a teacher and a learner. The teacher had to shock the learner, supposedly, every time the learner answered a question incorrectly. And the teacher got their orders from an authority figure in the group who had told them to shock them or not. And this test confirmed that the teacher would comply with shocking the learner as long as there was an authority figure in the room. And then compliance can be achieved by foot in the door, door in the face, or lowballing. Foot in the door is when you get someone to agree to a small request in the hopes of the future that they'll agree to a larger request. And then door in the face is where you try to get someone to agree to a larger request, which they'll obviously say no to, so in the hopes that they will agree to a smaller request in the future. And then there's lowballing. Lowballing is when you offer a lot of things to a person in an original agreement, but when you have to follow up on that agreement, you don't give them as much as you offered in the beginning to get them to agree with what you were saying.
Aggression is basically any act that's done with the intention of harming someone, when altruism is the unselfish help of other people. This aggression was explained by Freud with the Thanatos, which is a death drive, which is turned outward and satisfied by aggression towards others. Then Konrad Lorenz described an instinct that there are safety devices to end conflicts, and humans don't have this. Then John Dollard at Yale wrote the frustration and aggression hypothesis, which basically states that we're aggressive because of frustration and we need to take out anger on something. And this is because of the ego defense mechanism of displacement, where you are taking out your anger on something, which is the scapegoat. The target of the displacement is the scapegoat. Then there's excitation transfer, which is where you're really excited about something, so then you get really excited about something else that's like not that exciting. And then there's social learning theory, which basically states that we learn aggressive behaviors by being exposed to them. Bandura showed this with his Bobo doll experiment, where children were watching a video of some woman beating up a Bobo doll, and then they went out and like fought it because they saw it. And then there's the concept of bystander apathy, which is basically a result of the diffusion of responsibility, where people will see someone in need and suffering and they could help them, but they don't. And this was shown by the historical example of Kitty Genovese, brutally raped and murdered while people watched because everyone thought, oh, someone else will just help, and no one did anything.
So our next topic is group dynamics. There's multiple things concluding into group dynamics. There's risky shift, polarization, and groupthink. So for risky shift, we have people doing riskier things that they wouldn't usually do by themselves because of the presence of others. They feel like they could do whatever they want. And then polarization is where opposite opinions get even stronger when they're contradicted with. And last we have groupthink, which everyone agrees upon one opinion, even though it's really stupid, just to keep everyone happy and there's no fights or anything. For some events where groupthink actually caused a lot of trouble is the Challenger and the Bay of Pigs, and where it was avoided was the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Kurt Lewin studied 3 leadership styles. The first one is democratic, which is voting and basically everyone has a say. Then there's autocratic, which is like a dictatorship and that one person has the final say in everything. And then there's laissez-faire, which is everything is equal and you can do what you want, basically. He's alive, we promise. It's a live ferret. He's not dead. Okay, goodbye.
It's alive.